So let me say, first and foremost, I've come to this subject as someone who sits in the middle of relationship conflict, dealing with pragmatic financial issues. And so there's two components to this piece that I'm presenting today. And one component is what are creative ways to address the substantive issues that people are dealing with. And the core pieces I've identified are child support, family residence, and spousal support. I do have some notes on retirement assets and can even go into small business valuation issues. If we have that much time, I don't know that we will. But the other overlay of this is the extent to which helping people get to an agreement when they're in the middle of a relationship conflict, and by that I just simply mean that they're pulling apart from each other, they're taking their lives in different directions, is all about process. And the one thing that I learned 40 years ago as I sat down for my very first mediation, having absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do, is that if you don't address the process that the clients and you as a professional are involved in, if you just simply jump into subject matter issues, you're probably 50% less likely to be able to be successful in helping them because they're very much enmeshed and admired in their relationship. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that process piece first, because everything that I will then show you about what I think are creative ways to address issues of child support, the family residence, and spousal support presumes that there is a process and an effective process that's already in place and to which the clients have already assented that they're willing to work inside that process. And the process, there are several key components to the process. One is identifying for the clients at the outset that it is actually two processes that are being done in the aggregate, because each party comes into the room as an ego. Each ego has its own history, its own sense of the relationship, its own sense of the issues that need to be addressed, and its own questions and areas of need to know. And so it needs to be recognized by them that they're doing that side by side. And the metaphor I use for that is to say, it's actually two mediations in one being done in the aggregate. And I say to clients, assume for the sake of discussion, you're in contiguous backyards with a 5-foot fence. And you're each tall enough to look over the fence. And by the way, if I have somebody who's just 4 feet, I make an adjustment. And the other person is saying, I'll do my thing in front of you if you do your thing in front of me. And I will say, from a professional perspective, that's all I need is that kind of an access. And I can figure out how to negotiate with someone in a bilateral exchange of value, not in a power-based way. But the price that you pay for that incredible privilege is stay the hell out of the other person's backyard. Now, I know for a lot of financial professionals working in the divorce field, there are times that you're working with the clients by yourself, not necessarily in a collaborative meeting or not necessarily in a mediated meeting, but you're the professional in the room with them. And these process considerations I have found to be incredibly helpful and effective as a way of changing their understanding, the client's understanding of what they're doing in that room with you, and getting them sort of to realize that yes, there is the ego of you that is confused and angry and hurt and worried and concerned about financial. And then there's the process of the two of you getting to an agreement. And so raising their awareness to that process level is a critical step in getting them to then engage with the creative solutions that we're going to be talking about and looking. So a number of years ago, I had developed some process approaches just kind of organically out of circumstances that I was faced with. And one of the circumstances would be a spouse who would say, well, if only he would be different, or if only she would be different. And I found myself doing this. You know, I'd love it if this thing floated, but every time I let it go, it falls to the table. Now, I'm kind of annoyed by the noise it makes, so I'm gonna put it down instead of having it float. And the truth of who all of us are as human beings is that this has its own characteristic, and the characteristic is gravity is going to pull that to the table. It doesn't matter that I want it not to be pulled to the table. Well, you can want somebody to be different. You can want somebody to, gee, if only, but you have absolutely zero capacity to make that happen. So I also was reading a book at the same time, a phenomenal book called The Clockwork Universe. And it was a story of Isaac Newton and Leibniz competing with each other in the late 1700s to come up with truths about the physics of the way that the world worked. I mean, these guys in the 1780s are measuring how far away is the moon. Imagine how their brains could get wrapped around something like that, and they were doing it successfully. And Isaac Newton came up with the first law of gravity. So I'm reading this book, and I'm looking at this, in my office, a pen I'm dropping, not a big roll of tape. And I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to call these Newtonian laws of relationships. And they're Newtonian in the sense that in all the period that has come since Newton, no one has ever corrected the formulas that he came up with in terms of the law of motion, the law of gravity, and these truths that he found. So I'll tell clients, these are things that are true about all of us and how we work and how we function. You can either ignore them to your peril, or you can observe them to your strategic success. So one is, quit worrying about what the other person's doing. And I will tell you that on a practical level, I have clients who in the middle of they'll buy into this, and then in the middle of a conversation, they'll start to say, yeah, but all he cares about is, and I'll do this, meaning you're going over the fence, you're trespassing. And they get it, and then they stop that behavior. So by helping them understand, here's things that will work for you, these are things that won't work for you. Clients in their own self-interest can see, all right, I'm not comfortable, this isn't naturally intuitive to me, kind of feels a little bit like therapy, but it isn't. We only have a defined process of getting to a resolution. And then when they see this shortcut of me doing this, they will stop doing that kind of behavior, and we can move more quickly through answering questions, identifying issues, giving analysis of options, and looking at consequences of choices. So, so I work from, just again to deal with the process side of this, I work from two frameworks that I offer the clients. And this is just the way that I've evolved doing this over the last 40 years. And actually built this model sort of without any training, because I didn't know there was any training. In 1980, I didn't know that Steve Erickson and O.J. Kugler and John Haynes were in Atlanta telling people how to do this work. I just sat down and said, well, how do I do this? And sort of looked at what worked and let go of what didn't work. But one framework addresses this behavior piece. And so the behavior piece is anchored around individuation, that each one comes in as an individual. That person is having his or her own experience of what we're doing, and the other person comes in the same way. And I use that simple backyard metaphor because people can relate to that. Yeah, I shouldn't trespass into the other person's backyard. And what do you get for that? You get everything you need to know about how to negotiate with this person. Literally everything you need to know if you're listening and you're looking and you're watching and you're engaging in constructive conversation as opposed to falling into old marital habits, which is what, of course, they typically bring into the room. So one framework speaks to the behavior piece. The other framework is a substantive approach of how do we deal with your stuff. Let me see where we are with respect to the slides. So first I operate from a framework for analytical thinking, and this is, I'm sure, not something that I invented, but I invented it for me. And basically it looks at a range of thinking that goes from the macro view, which is I often refer to as the 1,000-foot view, to the micro view, which is where clients come in. So for example, early on, doing mediation training and doing a role play, one spouse would walk in and say, well, I love my kids and I'm certainly going to support my kids, but I'll be damned if I'm going to pay her alimony or spousal support. And then the other one responds to that. If you let the clients take you to that micro level, you're dead. There's just nothing you can do to resolve that. So the solution for most impasse developing circumstances is to pull them back up to a macro view. And the macro view for me has been first introducing this behavior framework and then introducing the substantive framework, asking the clients if that makes sense to them. And it always makes sense to them about the behavior piece because they think it only applies to the other person. So great, hold him at bay and I'll be a happy camper here. When in fact, obviously, it's critical that they both engage in it.